Hello everyone, this is the lecture on Unit 5, Chapter 9 on collective negotiations. I will tell you this will be very abbreviated because of two reasons. One, as a building principal, your role in collective negotiations would be very limited other than to report on conditions in your building and to contribute to information around the formation of the district's proposals for collective negotiations. The second reason is since most of you will probably spend most of your career in South Carolina, where presently there are no teachers unions, a lot of this is irrelevant. However, I do think it is important for you to understand the collective bargaining process at the very least, in that you have an understanding of it if you are questioned in an interview or if you were to move out of state. I would say that collective negotiations are a function of unions, as I mentioned previously, and the goal is to arrive at collective bargaining agreements. Unions gained traction in education in the 1970s and have grown since. I'm on the next slide. This slide reviews the history of related federal legislation. For those of us who are social studies teachers, obviously some of these acts that we see are landmark pieces of legislation in the labor movement. I'm moving all the way over to slide number 4 at this point. Slide number 3 are some definitions and some things that I won't elaborate on. In terms of the idea of working conditions on page 4, some things that would fit under the scope of negotiations here would be the hours, the minimum work hours of a teacher, the length of the school calendar, could be salary and benefits, obviously, are a big piece of that part of working conditions. With that, I'm moving on to slide number 5, the bargaining process. And I'd just like to perhaps elaborate a bit on what happens at the bargaining table. It's a very interesting and process by which I would use. It's very similar to a poker game, really, unless you have made some significant gains with the union in terms of using win-win negotiations. Generally, it's very similar to a poker game, negotiating for a car, whatever you want to use as an analogy. Any negotiations process it's similar. Some things that I would point out is to be emotion free at the bargaining table until you need emotion. By that I mean a lot of negotiation is looking at the other person's point of view, listening to them carefully, checking their body language, and trying to find out what really the hidden messages are that are often part of human communications. Certainly emotion sometimes can be brought into this because a tactic is to try to tweak the emotion base of the person across the table from you to gain an advantage. So you have to put on your best objective, depersonalized state of mind when you go into negotiations, because generally people will try to get your goat, for lack of a better term. So you can use emotion, sometimes a spirited discussion, even to the point of an angry interchange, sometimes can let off some steam and move things along. But generally, that's not a useful tactic. A couple of things that I would discuss with you is the use of Excel spreadsheets in the bargaining process. It's very important to have well-constructed Excel spreadsheets so that you can quickly plug in the numbers that will be posed by you or the other side in terms of salary and benefits to see what their long-term effects are on budgets. So a good set of Excel spreadsheets showing salary and benefit numbers for employees are something that are very useful. One of the things that I've found is that oftentimes the deal is made in the hall. By that I mean oftentimes the table, there's a lot of posturing. The teams are face to face. The team has got to keep uh, a certain environment or atmosphere or perspective for all its members. But the power brokers of the negotiating team sometimes can meet more informally on a break or in passing in the hall. Oftentimes, a lot of the negotiations actually that lead to a successful agreement are informal and behind the scenes. One of the things that I would suggest you is that one person who is on your bargaining team needs to take copious notes of what's going on, and at various points in times, what will happen when you do get an agreement, you need to have various components of that signed off on the actual language in the bargaining proposal, so that there's no confusion when you come back later to ratify the contract from both sides. One of the other things that I would warn you about is if you ever are in a collective bargaining situation, oftentimes they would be done after school. People are tired. I've been in them that have gone deep into the night, 3, 4, or 5 o'clock in the morning, and try to avoid those situations because everyone's judgment is impaired. Emotion rises to a boiling point as people become exhausted, and I don't think you make your best decisions in that type of environment. I'm over on page 6 right now, and that's about impasse procedures. Impasse is simply the idea that you cannot come to an agreement, that you don't think that that can occur without some outside help. Either side can declare impasse at any time. What it does is it begins to kickstart the process of bringing in a mediator for the purposes of trying to find common ground. If mediation is not successful, then you can go to fact finding, where you basically present your side to a third party, who then takes all of that into account from both parties and then proposes an agreement. This is not binding, nor is arbitration. Where in some collective bargaining agreements there is binding arbitration where a third party can rule. Generally, it gets into the court system. In arbitration, what happens is somebody imposes the collective bargaining agreement. That does not occur in education. Work stoppage strategies that are used by unions. Generally, strikes are illegal by public educators, and in New York State, for instance, if teachers go out on strike, they're fined 2 days' pay for every day they're out on strike. So as you can imagine, that is a excuse me, that is a demotivator for going out on strike. And other tactics are used. For instance, they will work to rule. By that, what it means is they'll meet in the parking lot right when school starts. They march in as a group. No one does anything after school, whatever the boundaries of the contract are. In terms of that, they try to pressure all their members into working exactly to the contract. They'll do things like dress alike, buttons, ignore administrators, be nasty, spread nasty rumors about the superintendent. I have kind of an interesting story. We were having a superintendent's conference day after when we were in the midst of some protracted contract negotiations with our teachers association, and they all decided to meet before our session in the auditorium and all march in together, all dressed in black. Well, we as an administrative team found out that that was what they were going to do, so we all dressed in very colorful Hawaiian shirts, and I gave an opening speech that basically talked about all of the great things our teachers were doing for our students in the community. So it kind of took the wind out of their sails, so to speak, and so it was interesting. They marched in and all sat down, and I waited for them to sit down, and then I asked them to stand to recite the Pledge of Allegiance. And a lot of gamesmanship. I found that unions were not above using kids, spreading rumors through kids, talking to the community, basically bad-mouthing the Board of Education administration and every chance they would get, in the thinking that somehow they were garnering support for their position. And I think that in the long term that actually it hinders their position. Another tactic they would use is votes of no confidence, or at least rattle their sword that they would vote no confidence in the administration or a principal or a superintendent. The next slide talks about the master agreement or the contract, and you can see they've laid out for you. We've laid out for you here the various parts of a collective bargaining agreement. Let me just speak for a second to grievance and arbitration. Grievances are when there is an allegation of a breaking of the contract. In my time as an administrator, that is, the union thinks that somehow the administration has misapplied the contract. I've never seen it the other way, where administration says that the union is misapplying the contract. But nonetheless, what happens is there's usually a series of steps that go from less formal and more building oriented all the way to the superintendent becoming involved in terms of trying to figure out whether or not there was an infraction or an infringement onto the contract. If that cannot be worked out, then it goes to arbitration, where you have an arbitrator come in, listens to both sides, and will rule on whether or not the contract was violated, and will impose a solution to that. Arbitration is a relatively expensive process. Arbitrators are not cheap, so you try to avoid it at all possible. And with that, that's what I had to share with you on Chapter 9 and collective negotiations. They were always interesting. They were a lot of work, a lot of hours, sometimes very frustrating. But when you got a good agreement, and well, let me put it this way: you knew you had a good agreement when you, as the district, was not satisfied, and you know that the Teachers Association was not satisfied either, or some other union. Could be your cafeteria, could be bus drivers, could be your custodians, clerical aides. They all could have their own associations or be banded together under a union. For instance, in my last school district, the cafeteria workers and the custodians were in one group, and the clerical secretaries and the teacher aides were in a group, kind of a strange alignment, and actually caused some issues. With that being said, that's my comments on collective bargaining and collective negotiations.